that couldn't have come from anywhere else in the world at any other time. Interviews and insight from participants and landmark releases from The Clean, Tall Dwarves, The Chills, The Verlaines, The Bats and many more. Extended play every Sunday, 11 AM on 95 BFM.
The public, let me tell you, like public executions. I went to Cambridge University, Charles. I'm a serious fucking journalist living at one of the most important fucking times of human history.
The Wire.
Yes, you're back on The Wire. I'm Simon, your host, with you until 1 o'clock today. It's 20 past 12. Just quickly, another little bit of feedback there on the bail law change story. Yes, I'm very, very offended by Looney Sensible Sentencing Trust. Right now, so let me just play this.
The Wire.
Right now, I've got Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz on the phone. Selwyn, looks like none of us will be getting any more fibre in our virtual diet anytime soon. Can you tell us maybe why?
Yeah, a lot of revelations came through this morning, Simon, from interest.co.nz. Now, it's a report by Alex Tarrant, who reported that the Kiwi Pacific Fibre Cable project was sunk by United States fears about Chinese investment and espionage. Now, interest.co.nz is led by Bernard Hickey, a very respected business journalist and economic journalist. And it seems like Alex, his reporter's main contact, was Rod Drury. Now, he's an investor, a New Zealand investor, and what he had to say was, like in direct quotes in the article, it was made clear the United States authorities would not allow Chinese investment. Now, end of quote. Now, apparently, United States authorities, they believed that if Pacific Fibre was to secure Chinese investors in the project, and that was something that was made clear that they needed to do for it to actually float. It was a given that the investors would insist on using Chinese equipment to create and run the Pacific Cable. And now that was something that the Americans did not allow to occur.
So, can we just backtrack here a little bit, just for people, for listeners that aren't familiar with what's just happened? Pacific Fibre were planning to build a second fibre optic cable across the Pacific from the States, which would have effectively undercut the monopoly that the current internet providers, or the main, what do they call it, the trunk provider has for internet in New Zealand. Now, of course, they had to secure over $400 million in American funding for this 13,000K line. It didn't go through. Now, you've just mentioned that, of course, that it looks like the Chinese were going to invest a lot of money.
Yeah.
What would have stopped the Americans from putting in a bid?
Well, exactly. What happened was we knew that earlier this year, our Trade Minister, Tim Grosser, he introduced Pacific Fibre's directors to significant Chinese investors who were prepared to put big money up to see this thing occur. Now, that is what caused concerns amongst the Americans. Now, we all know that the United States, an investment emerging from the United States, is very, very thin and has been since about 2008. That may answer your question in that way. But what seemed to come through on the primary issue of this falling down was not that the Chinese were not interested in investing. Quite to the contrary, they were. But the United States actually blocked this from occurring. And it came down to it did not want a cable that connected from New Zealand and Australia to Los Angeles on the west coast of the United States that was going to be potentially made possible through Chinese hardware. And this is what once again raises this issue where the United States is very, very phobic about allowing Chinese hardware to have any place within the what we talked about last week, the Five Eyes network of countries.
That's right. There's been persistent rumours that in fact there's on Chinese hardware and firmware that there are backdoors built in. That in fact it could basically compromise the US's digital security.
That's exactly right. Now, just to confirm on that, the United States House of Representatives Intelligence Committee in June stated along the lines of what you're saying. That's saying, for example, it detailed that Huawei Technologies and also ZTE or ZTE Corp, both significant manufacturers of ICT hardware around the globe. And the US Intelligence Committee said that the concern was whether any of their equipment or its software was designed to steal information or establish the ability to do cyber attacks. So that pretty much in a nutshell is what it's on about. Simon, I wanted to put it into a perspective of why the United States is exerting its pressure on the Pacific too. And this is very, very intergovernmental, if you like, from the point of view. We've been reporting on this at 36parallel.com for some time and watching that both external powers, for example, they've marked out the Pacific as a patch they do seek to dominate. And that Pacific Fiber's demise really illustrates that fine line that both New Zealand and Australian governments stride in their trade relationships on one side with China and advancing security and military declarations, for example, with the US.
It seems to really handicap the economic aspirations of a lot of Pacific nations as well. My understanding was a lot of Pacific countries were very excited about the prospect of having a cable run through their backyard, which they could tap into.
Or any of the listeners that have been into the Pacific will really be able to testify how IT and generally internet connections are terribly slow or fluctuate at extreme kind of peaks of okay down to almost not happening at all. You're quite right there.
It seems to run against the Americans trying to maintain or establish friendships in the Pacific. There's a charm charm competition going on between the Chinese and the Americans, isn't there?
Well, I guess so on one level, on a diplomatic level, but what we can see is countries like New Zealand and Australia, they in some ways have become compromised over whose interests they should bow to. Now, this is a security defence kind of stoush that the Americans are kind of pushing here as opposed to a diplomatic or business one. That's their concern and that's why they moved to block it. For example, if we look at what the Americans have been doing to counter China's interests and reach into the Pacific is in Australia. Australia agreed this year to allowing US Marine contingent to deploy and base itself in Australia's Darwin military base right at the top of the Northern Territory there. And last night it was also revealed that Australia will allow another United States military contingent to deploy and base itself in Western Australia. Now these are all signals on a map. If you see what the United States has been doing, it's been countering the Chinese efforts to establish deep water ports throughout Melanesia and into the Pacific. So it's really a patch kind of position in war in a sense. I don't mean that in a shoot bullets type sense, but it's a move to try and dominate the Pacific in a much more aggressive way. What we do know is that Australia is always, like listeners would know, been a very friendly ally of the United States. It always has been. New Zealand, it hasn't, kind of enjoyed that role so much, hasn't played such a significant role, I should say, in US-led security strategies than Australia has. But just on those timelines, if we look at 2007, Bush administration Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice comes to New Zealand. When she's here, she says New Zealand is a friend and an ally. And that was the first time since the end of the ANZUS Treaty in the 80s that we saw the United States saying that type of thing. Then in recent times, like we've said on your program, Simon, New Zealand has been drawn into a closer association with US security defence apparatus to the point where in June it signed that Washington Declaration. Now that was really indicating a close security and defence relationship that is mapped out. Now the only thing that we can pick up here is such moves cause New Zealand's second largest trading partner, the People's Republic of China, to illustrate concerns in different ways, and that it is concern from the point of view of where New Zealand's foreign policy is shifting from security-led by the United States kind of leanings or trade-led, embracing the People's Republic of China's wants. And really, this article on Pacific Fibre illustrates. Really, it's a significant report that Alex has put out here because it illustrates the lengths that the United States will go to counter Chinese, what it perceives as Chinese moves to actually get closer into the United States' coast and to trawl it for intelligence information.
It does seem terribly counterproductive. You know, the US has got some huge IT companies like Cisco, for instance. They could have jumped in here. Yeah, it seems to me like they've shot themselves in the foot here a bit. They've missed an opportunity.
I think when we get polarised situations of geopolitical interference, that rationale and common sense seems to fall out the window. You know, looking into our history books when the Cold War was happening globally, you know, the most ridiculous decisions seem to be made, and quite often at the expense of the government or state or alliances that actually embarked on those decisions. With the Pacific, it is a given that it is now being contested by the United States in a fairly aggressive manner, and in any means it will use any means it can without, you know, physical aggression to achieve its strategic goal to actually dominate the Pacific and Southeast Asia, to block China's move into what the United States once felt was its historical patch. Now, when that situation arises, it kind of rises, well, what is China going to do in a responsive kind of move here? Now, what we do know is China doesn't seem to subscribe to the same tactics as the Americans on these types of things. It makes its move more diplomatically, strategically, kind of brokering common ground amongst the Pacific neighbours like what you're talking about, and positioning that influence that it has on nations like New Zealand and Australia through its economic options and the consequences of withdrawal of economic options being offered to these countries. And that's something that I think this article underscores, and we need to watch what happens from here.
Great. Well, Selwyn, thank you very much for your input again. As always, very informative, and we'll talk to you next week.
Okay, Simon, take care.
Our Wire.
That was Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz. Of course, we were just talking about the failed bid by Pacific Fibre to raise capital to lay a new fibre optic cable across the Pacific.